Hello, space travelers. Welcome to the channel where people create stories about the universe. Get ready for a new adventure.
The planet was officially logged as Thalorin 9. There weren't any oceans, forests, or seasons, just endless ice. It orbited a faint blue star way out on the edge of explored space. And the wind. It never let up. Temperatures almost never got warmer than -60, at least by human standards. The alien species called the Kerala picked this place for one reason: minerals. There were rare crystalline metals buried deep under all that ice. To get them out, you needed machines. And to keep those machines running, you needed engineers. And engineers? They needed a colony that actually worked. That's where things kept going wrong. The cold on Thalorin 9 wasn't just cold. It felt more like a slow, crushing pressure that crept into your joints, your circuits, even the materials around you, until something finally gave out. 3 colonies had already failed. This 4th one was named Frosthaven Station. The Kerala didn't take any chances this time. They built it carefully. Layered shelters, thermal generators, heated walkways connecting everything. Every machine was sealed tight. Every structure carefully regulated. Everyone living there got the same warnings. Don't stay outside longer than you have to. Don't take off your thermal gear. And never, ever sleep without controlled heat. They repeated that warning in every single briefing, which is why what Chief Engineer Zorren said didn't sound like an opinion. It sounded like a rule. Humans can't survive this kind of cold. Zorren stood in the main control room of Frosthaven Station, his tall, narrow body leaning slightly over a console while the wind rattled the structure around us. The Kerala were built for warm, breathable worlds. Their thin limbs and reflective skin didn't hold heat well at all. Without their tech, they wouldn't last more than a few minutes out there. He pointed at a thermal monitor. Even our systems are struggling. Biological endurance isn't even part of the equation here. I sat across from him, listening quietly. My name's Elias. I'm not a big guy, not intimidating either. I wore the same layered gear as everyone else working out there: a heavy jacket, insulated boots, gloves. I'd been hired as a structural mechanic for the mining equipment, fixing things, keeping them running, handling whatever broke. Zorren kept studying me. Humans weren't exactly a normal addition to Kerala missions. We didn't have any special adaptations. No special skin, no built-in heat systems, no internal temperature control, just flesh, limited endurance. He pointed at the external temperature display. Tonight, it'll drop to -83. Without proper shelter, you'll shut down fast. I nodded once. All right. He waited like he expected more, but I didn't have any questions. Didn't really react at all. Make sure you're back in your quarters before rest cycle, he added. I gave a small shrug. Sure. That was it. Meeting over. Outside the command building, the wind howled across the frozen plain. Snow drifted across the ground like smoke. The outpost lights barely cut through the darkness. People moved quickly between buildings along the heated walkways, orange energy lines glowing faintly under their boots. Everybody knew the rule: don't stay outside. Everybody except me. Out by the equipment yard, a few workers were watching. One of the Kerala logistics officers clicked his mandibles, sounding confused. Is the human stepping off the walkway? I did exactly that, stepped off the heated path and walked out onto the open ice toward the storage crates. The wind hit me hard right away. My jacket snapped against me and snow started piling onto my boots. Still, I didn't rush. One of the Kerala workers pulled up a visor display. Exposure is exceeding the safe limit. Another one muttered, humans can't survive this cold. I opened a storage crate and pulled out a bundle. Just a regular fabric blanket. Nothing fancy, no tech in it, just cloth. I gave it a quick shake, folded it under my arm, and started walking away from the outpost lights. The logistics officer followed me as far as the edge of the walkway. Human technician. I glanced back. Yeah? You're leaving the protected zone. Yeah. Exposure will result in biological failure. I looked up at the sky. Thin clouds were reflecting the dim starlight across the frozen ground. It actually looked kind of calm out there. Quiet? Peaceful? I'll be fine, I said. The officer froze. You cannot survive the night temperature. I adjusted the blanket on my shoulder. I grew up in Montara. He clearly had no idea what that meant. I gave him a small nod and kept walking. A few seconds later, the storm swallowed me completely. Back at the outpost, the Kerala workers just stood there. He will die, one of them said. Another checked the monitors. He has no suit telemetry connected. Then we recover the body at daylight. Inside the control room, Zorren got the report. He listened carefully. Clarify, he said. The human exited the colony voluntarily with minimal insulation. Zorren leaned back slowly. That's not possible. He carried only a fabric thermal sheet. Zorren stared at the display. Fabric cannot sustain life at -80. There was a pause. Then the officer said calmly, he stated he would be fine. Zorren turned toward the window, where ice scraped against the reinforced glass. Humans frequently misunderstand environmental data. Should we retrieve him? Zorren hesitated. The storm outside was getting worse. Sending a team out there could mean losing equipment. Or worse. He was warned, Zorren said. The room went silent. Log the incident. We'll send a recovery team at first light. Night on Thalorin 9 dragged on forever. The temperature kept dropping. The wind only got stronger. Sensors across the outpost started throwing out strain warnings. Hydraulics slowed down. Exterior cameras iced over. Inside, the Kerala workers kept a close eye on everything. Heat generators were pulling more power than expected. Thermal pumps started struggling. In the engineering bay, Zorren studied the diagnostics. Coolant pressure dropping in conduit 3. A technician answered, "Valve array is freezing." Zorren reacted fast. Switched to backup circulation. Another alert flashed. Walkway grid, section 5, offline. Manual restart, Zorren ordered. Even the machines built to survive this cold were starting to fail. Outside, the storm kept building. Snow stacked up against the structures, and the wind turned violent. Zorren watched the temperature reading. -83. And for just a second, he thought about me. Elias Cade. By now, he'd been exposed for over 5 hours. No living thing without proper protection should have been able to survive out there. Zorren pushed the thought aside. Morning would prove what happened. The hours dragged on. Repairs kept going. Alarms echoed all across the colony. Eventually, the long night started to break. The star slowly rose behind the clouds. The wind eased up. Snow began to settle. The temperature crept up a little. -70. Zorren put together a small recovery team. 2 technicians and a survey drone. They stepped out of the airlock carefully. Even with heated suits, the cold still cut through them. "Search the east sector," Zorren ordered. The drone lifted off and started scanning the frozen landscape. Minutes went by. Nothing. Then one of the technicians spoke up. "Thermal signature detected." Zorren leaned in closer to the drone feed. "That's not possible." The signal was moving across the ice. Not still. Walking. The drone zoomed in. Through the blowing snow, a figure came into view, heading toward the outpost. A human. I was walking straight toward the airlock like it was nothing. Snow covered my jacket. Ice had built up in my beard. The blanket was still tucked under my arm. Zorren just stared. I stepped onto the heated walkway and brushed the snow off my shoulders. The airlock opened. Inside, the Kerala technicians were waiting. I stepped in, and warm air filled the chamber. I stomped the snow off my boots. "Morning," I said. Nobody answered. Zorren showed up a few seconds later, looking me over carefully. "You were outside." I nodded. "Yeah. For the entire night cycle?" "Pretty much." He checked me with a medical scanner. Core temp, stable, heart rate, normal, no frostbite. For a second, he actually looked confused. "That environment causes mechanical failure," he said slowly. I shrugged. Yeah, it was cold. His eyes dropped to the blanket. "That level of insulation is not sufficient for survival." I folded it again. "Helps with the wind." The room stayed quiet. One of the technicians finally spoke. "You should be dead." I rubbed my hands together. "Coffee would help." Then I just walked past them, heading inside. No panic, no shaking. Just felt like I'd been out all night. Later that morning, the mining work picked back up. The storm had messed up a bunch of systems. Ice had locked up 2 of the rigs. A coolant pipe cracked at the power station. Zorren started sending out repair teams. While he was checking assignments, he noticed something odd. I'd already signed out gear. Location, external rig platform. He pulled up the camera feed. There I was again, walking across the ice. The wind was still going and it was still dangerous out there. The mining rig stood over me. A massive drilling tower, half frozen in place. The automated systems had failed overnight. I climbed the ladder slowly. No hesitation, no complaining. Zorren watched through the feed. "Human technician," he called over comms. My voice came through. "Go ahead. Your tolerance for this environment is unclear." I reached the top and crouched next to the frozen actuator housing. "Yeah. You should remain indoors until we understand the variables." I opened my tool bag. Metal clinked softly. "Rig's not going to fix itself." Zorren checked the sensors again. "Wind speed is increasing. Continued exposure will cause injury." I smacked the frozen housing with a wrench. Ice cracked loose. "Probably." Then I got to work, loosening bolts, clearing out ice, all manual. Bit by bit, the rig started coming back online. Zorren kept watching. Every machine they built needed protection. Heated casings, insulation, backup power loops, and here I was, out in the storm with a basic set of tools. After about an hour, I climbed back down, wiped the frost off my gloves. "Rig 3's operational," I said. Zorren ended the transmission. Back in the control room, the technicians exchanged looks. One of them finally spoke. "Chief Engineer." Zorren didn't answer right away. The technician continued. "Our systems need constant thermal regulation." Zorren nodded slowly. "Yes." And the human slept outside. Zorren kept watching the feed as I walked back through the blowing snow. Machines struggled, pipes cracked, circuits froze, but I just kept moving through it like it was another normal day. "Keep monitoring him," Zorren said quietly. The technician asked, "For safety?" Zorren didn't look away from the screen. "No." He paused. "For understanding." Out beyond the colony, the wind pushed fresh snow across the ice. I adjusted my jacket and kept walking. The cold was right there with me, but it didn't stop me. And inside Frosthaven Station, the Kerala started realizing something they'd never even considered before. The cold that destroyed their machines wasn't the same cold that stopped a human. The second storm hit 4 days later. Nobody at Frosthaven Station thought it would be worse than the first one. Thalorin 9 always had storms. Wind, ice, snow. That's what the colony was built for. But their designs were based on machines, not the planet itself. Early in the evening cycle, the sky turned a darker shade of gray. The wind shifted. Zorren noticed it first. Pressure readings outside the station started dropping. Fast. He watched the sensors flicker across his display. "Atmospheric instability is increasing." A technician adjusted the system. "Wind velocity is rising." Zorren leaned forward. "How fast?" 72 units, and climbing. That was already beyond safe limits. Zorren opened the warning channel. All external personnel returned to shelter immediately. Out on the ice, some rigs were still running. Automated loaders were hauling crystal ore back toward processing. Most of the work had shifted to machines. It had to, but machines had limits. Zorren knew that. The first failure came 10 minutes later. Thermal conduit 6 is offline. Another tech jumped in. Heat circulation dropping in the eastern habitat. Zorren didn't hesitate. Redirect generator output. Outside, the wind slammed against the structure harder than before. Snow slammed into the colony walls like handfuls of sand being thrown. The sensor readings kept climbing, 90 units, then 100. Zorren watched the structural stress indicators creep closer to the red zone. Seal the external walkways. Already sealed. Recall the drones. 2 are already frozen. Zorren didn't respond. He just kept his eyes on the flood of alerts stacking up. Then another technician called out, "Chief Engineer." Zorren turned. External Rig 4 is still active. He pulled up the feed. The drilling tower stood alone out on the ice. Snow blasted across the platform, and there was a figure moving near the lower actuator housing. Zorren recognized it right away. Me, Elias Cade. He opened the comm channel. "Human technician," I answered a few seconds later. "Yeah." "Return immediately." "The storm has intensified." I sounded calm. "Yeah, I see it." "You must evacuate." A loud metallic crack rang through the comms. I just hit something with a tool. "Coolant line on Rig 4 split," I said. Zorren stared at the screen. "You cannot repair that in these conditions. If it freezes, we lose the rig." The wind howled louder. The readings climbed again. 120. Zorren's voice got firm. "Abandon the equipment." I went quiet for a second. Then I said it plain. "Give me 10 minutes." Zorren was about to shut that down, then another alert flashed. "Primary heat exchanger slowing." Another tech jumped in. "Ice forming in the intake ducts." Zorren understood right away. If those exchangers froze, the whole colony could lose heat circulation. The storm was strong enough now to damage the intake towers. He checked the external cameras. Ice was already building up on them. A technician asked, "Can the maintenance drones reach them?" Zorren shook his head. "The wind will tear them apart." Inside the control room, the temperature dipped slightly. Not much, but enough to notice. Zorren went back to the comms. "Human technician." "Go ahead." He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "The heat exchanger towers are freezing?" I didn't answer right away. All he could hear was the wind blasting through my mic. Finally, I said, "How bad?" "System failure likely in 30 minutes. A pause. Then I said, "I'll handle it." Zorren blinked. "You are at Rig 4. "Yeah." "That position is 600 meters from the towers." "I know." "You cannot travel that distance safely." I sounded a little confused. "Why not?" Zorren felt something new creep in. Uncertainty. "The storm will cause biological collapse." I let out a short laugh. "Zorren." "Yes?" "It's just weather." And then I cut the transmission. Zorren stared at the screen. I secured the coolant line with a manual clamp, tightening the bolts one by one. Snow piled onto my shoulders. The wind kept pushing against me, but my hands stayed steady. Once the pipe was sealed, I packed up my tools. Then I stepped off the platform and headed straight into the storm. Back inside the colony, a group of Kerala workers gathered around the display. They watched my small figure move through almost total whiteout. "Visibility is under 10 meters, one of them whispered. "He'll freeze before he reaches the towers," another said quietly. Zorren didn't say anything. The camera struggled to keep a clear image. Snow streaked across the lenses and wind shook the towers hard. I made it to the first exchanger tower. Ice had built up across the intake grid, blocking airflow. Zorren spoke over comms again. "You'll need to clear the intake manually." "I see it. Be careful, the structure is unstable." I swung my tool bag over my shoulder and started climbing. The ladder rattled with every gust. Ice cracked under my boots. Halfway up, I stopped. Not because I was scared, just needed a breath. Then I kept going. Back in the control room, nobody spoke. Even the alarms felt distant now. They just watched me climb through a storm that had already taken out multiple systems. At the top, I strapped myself to the frame with a simple harness, pulled out a pry bar, and got to work. Slow hits, careful moves. Chunks of ice broke free and disappeared into the storm below. Zorren monitored the exchanger readings. At first, nothing. Then a technician spoke. "Airflow increasing." Another panel lit up. "Heat exchange efficiency rising." I kept going. Wind slammed into the tower. Snow coated my arms. My gloves stiffened with frost. But little by little, the intake cleared. Zorren watched the numbers climb back toward normal. After about 15 minutes, the exchanger stabilized. He spoke into the comm. "Airflow restored." I didn't answer right away. I was still knocking ice off the outer vents. Finally, I said, "Good. You need to return immediately." I started climbing down. Still got another tower. Zorren almost argued. Then he looked at the storm levels and the second intake tower. Without it, the system still wasn't safe. He spoke quietly. "Understood." I crossed the ice again. The wind shoved me sideways a couple times, but I kept moving. The second tower looked worse. Ice had sealed nearly half the intake. I climbed again. Same process. Hit, break, clear. Piece by piece, the ice came off. Inside the colony, the temperature finally stopped dropping. Heat started flowing properly again. You could feel the tension in the control room ease. By the time I climbed down, the storm was starting to weaken. Wind dropped below 100 units. Visibility improved a little. Zorren opened the comm. "Exchangers are stable." I picked up my tool bag. "Good. You can return." I headed back toward the outpost lights. By the time I reached the airlock, almost an hour later, the technicians were waiting again. I was covered in snow. My jacket looked completely white. I brushed ice off my sleeves. "Storm's easing up," I said. Zorren studied me. "You remained functional for 90 minutes in direct exposure." I pulled off my gloves. "Yeah." "Your biological tolerance exceeds all projected survival models." I gave a small shrug. "I grew up shoveling snow." Zorren tilted his head, still trying to figure me out. That explanation lacks scientific clarity. I gave a small smile. "Cold doesn't kill you if you know how to work with it." Zorren paused, thinking that over. "So you treat the environment as something manageable." I shrugged. "It's just cold air." He glanced over at the monitors where their machines had been struggling for hours. "Cold air that shuts down complex systems." I grabbed my tool bag. "Yeah," I said, "machines stop when they freeze." He looked back at me. "And you don't." I thought about it for a second. "Not if I keep moving." Zorren watched me walk out of the airlock. No pride, no big moment. Just another mechanic wrapping up his shift. Later that night, the storm finally died down. The sky cleared, and stars spread out over the frozen plains. Zorren stood alone in the control room, staring out at the quiet ice. The colony systems were stable again. Mining would start back up in the morning. All of it. Because one human walked straight into a storm their machines couldn't survive. A technician stepped up beside him. "Chief Engineer." "Yes?" "The human is resting." Zorren nodded. "He should be." The technician hesitated. "Your earlier statement, it may need revision." Zorren kept looking out at the frozen world. He remembered exactly what he'd said before, like it was a fact. Humans cannot withstand the cold. He spoke slowly. No. The technician waited. Zorren finished the thought. That statement was incomplete. Outside, the wind moved gently across the ice. Temperatures were still deadly for almost any species. But somewhere inside the station, I was asleep, resting easy after spending the day out in storms. Zorren kept his eyes on the horizon. The Kerala had built machines to survive this place. But me? I just treated it like winter. And that difference, he realized, mattered more than anything they'd brought with them. Turns out the cold was never the real threat. Underestimating humans was.